Hello, welcome to the VCSP Tech Hub. My name is Brandon McCoy, and in today's video, we're going to be discussing the three tiers of the Veeam Service Provider console. Those tiers being the service provider, the reseller, and the end user or company tiers. Now, each one of these tiers has different use cases, capabilities, and permissions. Let's start with a slide to look at the hierarchy of the tiers. Then we'll take a look at each tier individually. And finally, we'll jump into the lab and show you all of these tiers in action. So as you can see, starting at the top level, you have the service provider. This is the person or company that runs and hosts the infrastructure necessary for the console, that being the service provider console itself, the Cloud Connect and Cloud Gateways necessary, and often backup and disaster recovery services as well for offsite backup and replication, which is a little outside the scope of the service provider console, but those are all tied in with the Cloud Connect and often other use cases. Now, the reseller, this could be a traditional reseller, or this could also be another service provider, yet a smaller MSP. In either case, these are companies that either don't have or don't want to spin up the resources necessary to run the infrastructure for the console and the likes. And so the service provider that owns the console will white label their console to the reseller. The reseller can simply log into a portal over a web URL and log in and do pretty much most all of the functionality that the service provider can do, but only for a subset of their own customers, all quoted out by the service provider themselves. Finally, you have the end users. This could also be referred to as a tenant or a company or customer. These are kind of all used interchangeably. This is the lowest tier on the rung in terms of capabilities and permissions. Keep in mind that the service provider could also have their own end users, but a lot of times in this scenario, the service provider is just the one hosting, and then the reseller or the smaller MSP is white labeling the service provider's service provider console and then managing their own customers over a web UI. So let's take a look at each one in more detail. As I mentioned, the service provider is at the top. They are the ones who host everything. They've got obviously complete control and visibility of everything, both the resellers and the resellers' customers. So like I mentioned, the service provider, they may manage their own customers. They may offer a reseller login so that other MSPs can manage their own customers. There could also be a combination of these things happening, but it's important to know that the service provider has full control of everything. So let's say that the service provider has a 10 terabyte NAS, they carve out 5 terabytes for the reseller, and then the reseller distributes those 5 terabytes of repository space for their customers. The service provider could revoke any of that. They could, make changes to that reseller's end user. And so it's just important to note that this service provider top level has full control of everything, including the reseller's resources. As mentioned, the service provider is often hosting repositories as well as data stores for both Cloud Connect backup and Cloud Connect replication. From a licensing perspective, they're managing the Pulse license as well as the agent license. So a little bit about this. The service provider console comes with a free service provider console key. This is owned by the service provider. However, if you also would like to do agent management, where you're pushing out backup policies for standalone Windows, Linux, and Mac agents, you can install a master agent key on the service provider console. Now, you can only install one key on the console, so this would be the service provider's key, and then both the service provider and the reseller could push out agents and manage backup policies, all pulling from this master agent key. The reseller cannot bring in their own agent license. The reseller can also not bring in their own Pulse integration. So all of the license ownership is managed by the service provider. The second tier is the reseller tier. And again, this could be the traditional reseller who is simply reselling licenses and products and needs a single pane of glass for visibility. Or this could be a smaller MSP who wants to offer backup services, doesn't have or doesn't want to use the infrastructure needed to run. They're limited in scope by the service provider. So an example could be that the service provider has two different data centers, data center A, data center B, and the service provider gives the reseller access only to data center A and only 5 of 10 terabytes and limits the number of customers that they can onboard and so on and so forth. They, of course, can manage their own customers and only those customers. They can do almost everything the service provider can do. Few things that they can't do. They can't use their own Pulse token. So this is in regards to a secondary VCSP who has a Pulse account and would like to use their own licensing. That is not an integration in the service provider console that can be done. Only the service provider, the owner of the service provider console, is the one who can bring their Pulse integration. Now, the reseller can still create licenses and push those licenses out to customers, but they're all going to be under the service provider's support contract. Another thing that the reseller can not do is, of course, create additional resellers. They can't install an agent key on the service provider console. And that's more or less it. Of course, they can't affect any other customers or resellers outside of their purview, and it's top down, so they can't see anything above the reseller view. They can see all of their customers, and that's it. Now, one thing they can do is they can bring their own ConnectWise integration. So if you're using ConnectWise Manage, we also have an integration with Automate, although that is going away in future versions. So with ConnectWise Manage, if you want to bring in your integration there for billing and ticketing, that is a possibility. Finally, we have the end user, company, customer, tenant. All of these words are kind of interchangeable here. So their permissions are the most restricted. They have the ability to see their jobs. They have single pane of glass. And of course, this is assuming that the reseller or the service provider provides access to this console over the web. They can log in. They can see their jobs. If they have a co-managed IT, maybe they want to do some backup jobs, so they can do management of agents and some self-service for 365, again, assuming this is all already set up by the service provider and or the reseller. And they can also have their own alarms. So all of the alarms are global settings. So for instance, a backup job that doesn't run for more than 24 hours, that rule would apply to every customer, every reseller. You could log in as the customer and say, for this specific customer, that alarm shouldn't go off unless a job doesn't run for 2 days. So you can create customized alarms for the individual end users. So that's about it for the slides. Let's jump into the lab and take a look at the different roles, and we'll dive a little bit deeper. So here we are in the service provider console, and I think a good place to start is the roles within the different tiers. So we were talking about the tiers, the service provider, the reseller, and the end user tiers. Within these tiers, there are also roles. So for instance, I'm logged in as the service provider. That is the top tier. The top role within this tier is the portal administrator. Now, by default, the portal administrator is the only one that can access the console on behalf of the service provider. And the service provider console grants this role to members of the local administrators user group on the machine where the console is installed. Of course, you can add additional portal administrators, and they can do everything and anything. Next, you've got the site administrators, and let's actually take a look at these roles as I walk through them. So I'm going to click on configuration on the top right, and I'm going to go to roles and users, and we'll start with just Windows. You can do Windows users and you can do single sign-on. For now, we'll just stick to Windows users, just in terms of how we're giving these rights and roles. So we click new here, got my domain specified, and you can see here I've got users and groups. And then for the role, Okay, so again, portal administrator, they can do it all. Next, you've got site administrator. Now, site administrator is not shown here, but that's because the site administrator allows you to limit specific Cloud Connect. So I've only got one. If I had a Cloud Connect in Ohio, a Cloud Connect in Atlanta, maybe I would say that this site administrator, they can do everything that the portal administrator can do, but only for Atlanta or only for Ohio. Next, you've got the portal operator. So they can perform full management for the companies in scope, right? So I can say that this portal operator is allowed to do everything, but only for these specific companies. Also, the portal operator cannot create nor remove companies. Okay. Finally, you've got the read-only user. And just like it sounds, they can monitor and read information of the companies, such as subscription plans and reports. And of course, and that can also be scoped to only specific customers. We'll go to the other roles as we go through the different tiers. For now, let's continue on. So again, I am the service provider. I'm the portal administrator. I can do anything and everything. Under companies, I've got some customers that I have created. I've also got a customer that has been created by my reseller. So like I mentioned, even though the resellers have their own subset of customers, the service provider can still see those, they can delete those, they can modify those. If I come to this reseller tab here, this is where I can create a reseller and set a scope limit. So let's do that. I'm just going to edit this first class MSP. So we've got some login information. We put that in here. So we've got the site scope. So again, this is how many Cloud Connect servers do I have? What locations do I have? And where do I want this specific reseller or MSP to be able to do things? I can set a quota on the number of companies that they're allowed to onboard. Okay, these are the services that they're allowed to offer. So do I want them to be able to deploy agents and create backup jobs? Do they need backup resources for Cloud Connect? So if I look here, I've got this Veeam repository. This is added to my Cloud Connect backup and replication instance. It's the full amount of space available. And then I can carve out a name for the reseller's repository, give them a certain amount of storage. When they log in, they're going to see first-class MSP cloud storage, and they can do this same action to their individual end users. And again, as a service provider, I can do this for my end users and for my resellers. So right here, I'm quoting out some storage for a reseller that they can then further divvy up for their customers. I've turned off some of these other things because either they don't use those or I don't want them to have access to those. I've given them some access to do 365 and some self-service. I can limit the bandwidth for their companies. I can enforce multi-factor authentication. I can send them a welcome email to let them know how to log in and some information. And this is important. So the license management here. So do I want this MSP or reseller to be able to use my licenses to, cut their own licenses, or do I want to control that? Right. And so there's a couple things that you'll need to do. It's in the documentation for like a deeper dive on everything you need to set that up. But for the most part, you just need to turn it on. Do you want them to be able to use your Pulse token? Okay. So we'll next and finish out of that. Everything else in here is, this is the overview of the console. We've got other videos that go into that. So really the point of this is just to show you the different roles and how I would create a reseller and the view of the service provider. So now that we've got that established, let's log in as the reseller. So I'm going to log out here, and it's going to be company/username, and it is case sensitive. So first class MSP /MSP, and top secret password, and we're in. All right, so from the overview, it looks very similar to the service provider because, again, they can do most of what the service provider can do, minus a few things like bringing in their own Pulse integration, right? Mostly stuff to do with licensing. So let's once again go to roles and users. All right. And I'm just going to edit this one. Actually, let's create a new one. So let's go to new. Yep. Okay. Give them a login. All right. So here we go. For the resellers, the reseller has the global administrator, which if you look on the top right, that's what I'm logged in as. And let's just explore these different roles. So the service provider global administrator is the primary user acting on behalf of a reseller company. And that user is created when a reseller account is registered in the console, and there can only be one, like in the Highlander. Of course, they have full privileges of this specific tier. Now, next, you've got the service provider administrator. So similar set of privileges as the global administrator, but they cannot modify or remove the global admin. So the global admin is just a top level, same set of permissions, but can't be deleted, and of course can delete anything underneath them. Then you've got the service provider operator. They can perform all kinds of management tasks for companies. You can limit the scope. So if we click next right here, I can say, only, and I've only got one company that has been assigned to me as a reseller. If I had multiples, I could then further scope that out to this specific role. Okay. Next, we've got the service provider user. So this person has access to client companies' monitoring data, but cannot perform most configuration and management tasks. They can also be limited to a specific scope of customers. Let's go back here. Then you've got the service provider invoice auditor, and that's strictly for billing. That's all that they can do. Okay. I can do MFA for all of these users as well. And then if we take a look at, let's actually go to the configuration tab and the plugin library. So you'll see here, I've got the Pulse plugin. Now you will see here the VCSP Pulse portal. You can configure your token. This may lead you to believe that you can bring, as a reseller, your own token. However, that is not the case. There can only be one, again, the Highlander reference, token for the console, and that's going to belong to the service provider, and that's simply what we're bringing in here. That's where you need to get the service provider involved to be able to add this in so that you, as the reseller, can start mapping companies and creating license keys. So this is something that the service provider has given me the ability to do. I've got my ConnectWise integration here, and other than that, it's business as usual, just like a service provider. So if I go to companies, in the previous screen, we saw all the companies. Now as the reseller, I only see this one because that's the only one that has been scoped out to me. And what's interesting also is that the service provider can create this company and then assign it to the reseller, or of course the reseller can create companies on their own. And if I edit here, you can see that I can create services. So if we go back to that Cloud Connect example, I can see any repositories that have been given to me. Here's that one we saw earlier, and now I'm further slicing that up for individual users. I can come into backup jobs. I can see my virtual machines. I can create and edit my 365. I don't have any agents for this reseller, but if I did, I could create backup jobs. Of course, I can add those in because my service provider's given me that ability, so I can download the management agent, assign backup policies, so on and so forth. All right, so let's keep it moving. And now finally, let's log in as a client. Going to log out once again, and I'm going to use that same tenant we were just looking at. All right, here we are. So you can see there's not really a whole lot here. One thing is there's no overview screen, right? It just brings you right to alarms because, this is an individual end user or company screen. So there's not really a whole lot of overview to see. It's just what alarms, are you meeting your RPO SLAs? What resources are you using for backup and DR? We've got heat map. There is some co-management, like I mentioned. So, here's a backup job for an agent. I can create that. I can edit those jobs. Come into my managed computers, discovered computers. I can download the management agent, right? So these are the capabilities that my reseller and or service provider has given me. Let's end it out with the roles for this particular user. So we'll go into roles and users. Let's once again create a new role. And so here we go. We start with the company owner. So the company owner obviously is the owner of the company. This is the primary user acting on behalf of a company. And they are created when a company account is registered in the console. And once again, there can only be one. So this is that top level. Next, you have the company administrator. Similar set of privileges to the owner, but cannot modify or remove the company owner. Very similar to that reseller hierarchy we were just looking at. You've got the local administrator, similar to the company owner, but they do not have access to billing information. They cannot create, modify, or remove locations in scope. And the scope of data available to a location administrator can be limited to one or more company locations. You've got location user, which has access to company monitoring data, but cannot perform most configuration and management. So more of a read only for reports and billing. You've got a subtenant. A subtenant is just a user who has cloud repository resources allocated and acts as a subtenant in Veeam Cloud Connect. So, you think back to the Cloud Connect repository, the service provider gives the reseller 5 of the 10 terabytes. The reseller gives a company 1 of those 5 terabytes, and then the company owner or the reseller or the service provider gives a certain number of tenants, each a specific amount of space, so that you have different quotas for different users all within one company umbrella. And then finally, you have the company invoice auditor. And once again, this is strictly for billing and invoicing. Okay. Well, look, you've got the plugin library for the 365, the locations. These are just the different locations where a company and the users could be located. Here's where I have my customized alarms that I was talking about. And I can see the keys that have been assigned to me. I can download those keys. Of course, I can't create my own keys or anything like that. I've got the backup policies for the agents and just information about my company and a profile. So again, this is the lowest set of permissions, but it makes sense from what a user might want to do if they were to log into the console. So that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Please make sure to check out all the other great videos on the VCSP Tech Hub. And until next time, we'll see you later.